Shut up and sit down.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Fight for Liberty show. Today, we have an amazing guest, Elliott Scheirman. He is running against Dan Crenshaw for Congress. And so, Elliott, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me, David.
My pleasure. So I like to start off every show with the simple question of what's your political testimony? Who and what got you to the ideology that you have right now?
I appreciate that one. So back in the 2008 presidential election cycle, I was just right out of college, and I was having a conversation with a coworker over lunch, and they asked who I was voting for in the upcoming election. And I knew that I was, by that point, I was already tired of what then seemed like forever war, just from, the 9/11 fallout wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was, thinking, hey, we've had enough of this war. I really don't think we need another Republican president. And they're like, oh, so you're going to vote for that Obama guy? I was like, no, I've seen some of his fiscal issues, and this seems like he's going to end up doing a lot more government spending and raising taxes, and that's not what I want either. So he's like, you kind of sound like a libertarian. And I was like, no, I'm not a liberal. So he's like, no, libertarian. It's a word. Why don't you go look it up? Take a political quiz or something. So I did, and I might have been the I side with, if that was around back then, or maybe it was the world's smallest political quiz or something. And I was like, yeah, I am absolutely a libertarian. So it was kind of there's a word for what I think. And it's not just I have to accept what I don't like about the other parties just because I like one of the other ones less. And that started a quite a long road from, doing a little bit of research on the internet. And then, here I am today running for Congress.
That's awesome. I always love the two different types of stories, because you have the people like yourself and myself who were basically already libertarians before we had any idea what the word meant. And then there's the people that were actually like hardcore Republican or Democrat that got like slowly moved over. So I always find it kind of interesting that there's those two major groups within the Libertarian Party.
Well, it doesn't stop people from calling me a right winger or a leftist any day of the week.
Right. You're a good libertarian if you get called a fascist and a commie in the same day.
Yeah.
All right. So I know where you stand on most of the issues, but I'm sure plenty of the people watching don't. So if you want to just give me a rundown of where you fall on kind of the most major issues like taxes, drugs, guns, war, abortion, just kind of the main binary issues.
All right. Well, when it comes to taxes, I am definitely against them. But I also, from my background in supply chain process improvement, I understand that changing large organizations, especially like something as massive as the United States government, is going to require incremental process improvement. So to that regard, I have a few policies where I think that there are achievable wins we can get, and also things to kind of plant the seeds of ideas for people who would like those smaller steps, so that they'd be more open and receptive to larger cuts or significant kind of model changes going forward. So one of the proposals I have is ending taxes on overtime work. So basically anything over 40 hours a week or 80 hours a week over a 2-week period, whatever the local state, however your local state figures it out, you don't pay income taxes on that. That is yours to keep. That kind of plan helps kind of get this struggling economy back on track, and it puts more money in people's pockets so that they can actually interact more with the economy and spend some more and maybe get things going. There's another idea I have called vote with your tax dollars, where a significant portion of what you are forced to pay in taxes, you can actually say, if I'm going to be paying these taxes, these are the programs and services that I do support and do care about, versus the ones that I completely oppose and have a moral objection to funding. So I noticed you dropped abortion in there as a topic that's very divisive for people. I
Right.
think that people absolutely have the right to not pay for things that they disagree with like that. For me, it would be something like, I don't want to pay for any more drone bombs to be dropped on innocent civilians on the other side of the world. And I think
Right.
that people should be able to have those kind of options if they are forced to pay taxes. Let them vote with their own tax dollars. What was the next topic you asked about?
I think I said guns and then drugs.
Guns. Oh, that's my favorite one, actually. Guns are the reason I actually started this campaign. So I am completely on board with you having the right to defend yourself with any tools that you see fit, so long as you are not harming others in the process.
Right.
Right now, the Republican incumbent I'm up against has vocally supported red flag laws, which allow the government to violate both your Second and Fifth Amendment rights to show up to your house and just take your guns because somebody thinks you might be a danger.
Right.
There's no due process to that. There's no charges filed. There's no court hearing. Police just show up and take your guns. And that is such an affront to the Constitution and to our inherent rights. And it's interesting to see someone like Republican, because they pretend to care about gun rights. Is if they care about nothing else, that's something that they care about. But the incumbent in my race is extremely awful on that. And in fact, he has the exact same stance on red flag laws as the Democrat in my race. So I'm really the only differentiator on that topic.
And this is Texas, right?
Yeah, this is Texas. Red Texas.
If we were talking about like a Vermont Republican or something like that, I could almost see that. But to be that bad on one of the most important Republican issues is mind-boggling, and to be one of the most popular Republicans in the country at the moment too.
Yeah, exactly.
Throws me off. But he owes most of that to Saturday Night Live, not anything he's actually done.
Yeah, well, that's true. And seeing how that worked for him, I before I even decided to run, I made a commitment to myself to not go, not use any of his injury or anything against him. That's something that happened. He's bad enough on the issues to go after. So that's what I'm sticking to.
Right. Yeah, he's done plenty of damage in office that we don't need to be picking him apart on his personal level.
Yeah.
So you did mention abortion, and that was kind of in the list. I'm curious where you stand on that as well.
So I like our presidential nominee, Joe Jorgensen, take the stance of I'm not personally for it, but I absolutely think that the government has no jurisdiction over the contents of our bodies. And therefore, it shouldn't even be a matter of public policy. It should be between individuals and their doctors and absolutely no one else. And for everyone who thinks abortion is horrible and awful, don't get one. Don't be forced to pay for one. You should not have to have anything to do with it or have to support it in any way if you oppose it. But you don't get to impose your morals onto the contents of other people's bodies. So that's my stance on it.
Right. I like that. I think the first thing that pushed me towards libertarianism was just the idea that immoral and illegal are two very, very different concepts. And I was raised and still am conservative Christian. So obviously my moral code says one thing, but as far as politics go, gay marriage, there's nothing that, whether you think it's a sin or not, you shouldn't be telling people that they can't do it. And when that was really popular, I think that's when I first started to realize that there was a problem with the conservative right-wing ideology of we need the laws to match the Bible. Because
whenever I hear people that kind of have that mindset, it's like saying, okay, so you've decided to go on a diet. Do you think the government needs to impose that red meat should be banned for everyone because you personally have made a decision to, follow a habit for your own life? Absolutely not. That's crazy. So apply that to anything else.
Right. I think, Ron Paul in the Republican debate in South Carolina, they gave one of the best arguments I've heard for libertarianism ever, where he was talking about legalizing heroin and saying, how many people in this room would start doing heroin tomorrow if it was legal? Like, do you really need the government to hold your hand and tell you not to do the things that you already don't like and don't want? If you're voting against something like abortion or drugs or even guns, if you hate guns so much that you're voting for, just stay away from them. There are plenty of cities with strict gun laws. If you live in Texas, maybe move to California if that's how you feel.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned drugs. So that's something that's people still seem to get a little weird about. Like the decades of propaganda are buried deeply in a lot of people's opinions when it comes to drugs.
Mhm.
What I like to point out is the fact that we have a model that we can point to that's been going on for over a decade. If you look at Portugal, they decriminalized every drug, including heroin and cocaine. And
Mhm.
guess what? Their drug addiction rates plummeted. They allowed people who had addiction to go and seek help as a medical issue rather than a criminal one. They don't fear getting arrested if they call and say, "Hey, I need help. I need treatment. I need access to facilities." They saved all sorts of money from wasting it on violent drug enforcement. Teen use has absolutely dropped like a rock because various drugs are legal. The adults who would otherwise buy them on black markets are just able to buy them, and there's not as abundant of a black market for young people to have access to.
Mhm.
It's like the only reason anyone would oppose it is if they just really think they need to be using the government to tell other people how to live their lives.
Right.
Now, there is one thing that a lot of people get concerned about when it comes to drug use and addiction. That's how desperate people get to maintain those addictions and the crimes that they resort to, whenever they are trying to do that. Those crimes should absolutely still be illegal. If you are trying to harm others or steal from them or threaten them or, harm their property in your own lack of sobriety, you should absolutely 100% be held accountable for that.
Oh,
But
100%.
simple possession and consumption are not are not acts that create victims.
Mhm. What do you feel? How do you feel about like distribution? If we're talking in a kind of decriminalized model like Portugal, where you still can't go to a heroin store, um, would you be for that still being a criminal offense to sell it?
I think that if it's not something that's illegal to possess or to consume, then it should be not illegal to sell. I think that if people are being harmful in the way they're distributing it, meaning making it available to minors or pushing it on to maybe certain areas where they're just creating blight as a result, that
Mhm.
there's a conversation to be had there. But if people are able to responsibly consume drugs like they do any other kind of pills in our society, I don't believe the government should ban that. I think that right now we have a lot of money with big pharma behind it, especially, and the prison lobby who loves to keep their cells full of just
Mhm.
making all of these things that aren't individually as an act a harmful event, but they want that to be a crime so that they can eliminate competition or keep their own interests served.
Right. And you mentioned the propaganda that's been going on for decades. I had a conversation earlier this week with a 19-year-old about marijuana and was giving me she was giving me some of the phrases and kind of stereotypes equating to like reefer madness, like the ads in the 50s. She actually said that it can make people more aggressive, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. If you've ever,
That's
like,
absolutely
me
unlike
as a
anyone I've
person.
ever observed who's consumed it.
Right. I'm a stoner. If you've met me, it doesn't make us more agitated. If you've met me sober and stoned, you know how it affects people. Um, but you're right. It's been generations and generations of this. And you also mentioned how it helps get it out of the hands of younger people. That was my biggest pitch when I was running for New York City Council last year. That was the thing on my palm cards that got the most attention. I was in a fairly conservative Democrat district. So, very family values based, very African American population. So, a lot of like the grandmas that I was talking to were very put off by the fact that I wanted to legalize marijuana. And I would always, I would ask them, like, how old are your kids or your grandkids, depending on how old they look. And they were like somewhere between 11 to 18. I'd say, okay, go and ask them which is easier for them to get, cigarettes, alcohol, or marijuana. And I promise you they'll say marijuana. And I can say that as someone that was smoking at 16 because I couldn't get my hands on alcohol. it's so much more difficult to go and buy it from a store underage than from the guy on the street corner.
Yeah, I mean, it was very abundant in my high school as well. So it's not something that that teenagers have any any trouble getting. And this is Texas. It's still a felony to have over a certain amount, and that's on your record forever. So
Right.
we're fighting some really draconian drug laws just on a state level. That's why one of the that's why one of my platform policies is to decriminalize marijuana from a federal level, just right off the bat, deschedule it, and also pardon any nonviolent offenders, serving time, for that.
Yes. I think that's one of the biggest things that has fallen off a couple of the bills that I've seen go through. Even here in New York, we decriminalized marijuana last year, but it was supposed to release like some 700,000 people and remove like a couple million records, and only like a couple hundred people have been released so far from it. They're so far behind schedule with that. They're like, we're gonna do all this great stuff, and I honestly still have a personal friend that is in jail serving time for a marijuana sentence.
Well, again, I can maybe understand a little bit of that because, as I mentioned, when you have drastic changes, you need to implement them in steps so that
Right.
you don't have just out of control chaos. And I get that. I mean, I don't ideologically, I don't think anyone should sit in a cell one day longer than they have to. But I understand from the way that bureaucracies work that they're going to have to do kind of a process. And the amount of money that they spend incarcerating people just in a year, if they could spend a portion of that just on some rehabilitation programs as well. Just because if you have someone who's been sitting in jail for 5 years, they have no job prospects coming out. They don't have any. They might have lost connections or whatever. So
Mhm.
just some vocational training, something like that, so that people have an option, so that they're not just dropped on the streets, as someone who has served time and with no prospects, because they're just going to turn to some other form of crime
Right.
in many cases. And recidivism is not ideal. Obviously, we want to have a justice system that should be focused on rehabilitation, not just punishment.
Hmm. I mean that's the most important thing in my opinion of the Portugal model that you mentioned is it's focused on having the best society instead of having the most well-behaved society.
Hmm.
It's not about do the right thing or else. It's about, okay, how can we make sure that everybody's getting along well. It's like a millennial version of kindergarten where it's just like, okay, let's get along together, rather than what we went through and what our parents went through of getting a switch if you did something wrong. So I think it's just kind of like a modernization of the criminal justice system as a whole. Where society's moved past the need for every single thing to land you in handcuffs.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are realizing, and right now, with as many states that have fully legal marijuana, or at least decriminalized, or even medicinal, they're saying, "Oh, this is fine." The people who want to smoke it, we're going to anyway, and
Mm,
it's a lot more controlled and safe. I don't like to make the tax revenue argument, but that's an undeniable thing that a lot of people do see as a benefit. And you've got Colorado that has so much money because they I think they allocate their marijuana sale taxes to just straight up to education. um,
mhm.
they have so much money they don't know what to do with it. That's Can you imagine that problem? Like, it seems like every state government would look at that and start salivating.
Right. Yeah, I don't understand why more states haven't. But you mentioned, that people are kind of okay with it once it comes there.
Mhm.
Uh, I actually had a couple of conversations this year that weren't like that, which
Right.
surprised me because I kind of had that same idea. I'd been to Colorado and Michigan a couple of times, and I'd seen it, but I was doing some canvassing work for the Republican primary for the state house in Michigan, and talked to a few of the people that lived in the only town in this guy's district that had any dispensaries. There were 3 dispensaries in like the smallest town in this district, no other dispensaries for about a 45-minute drive. Uh, and a lot of the people that I talked to complained about it. It was one of the most complained about things that I heard other than their governor, was
So,
that
so,
they
so
were allowing weed into their community, that all these stoners were here now, that I walk down Main Street and all I can smell is that reefer. Like, it was very interesting, but I couldn't nail down any like legitimate reasons for why they didn't like it. Yeah, I would always try to pick at it and try to get why they don't like, and it's just, they don't like weed. Like plenty of them even had great things to say about the dispensary's owner, because the same guy owns all three. He's a great member of the community. Everyone loves him. They just hate how he makes his money because it's
well,
weed.
it's funny that you mentioned the smell, because with legal marijuana, you have the option for a lot more safer vaping products that, people can still get the same kind of euphoric effect and not give not belch out an unpleasant smell. And if it's legal, that's a lot more prevalent. So
Right.
That's an argument kind of in favor, in my opinion.
Right. I think one of the other things that we need to change as far as marijuana policy goes that would super help that issue is we need to allow on-site consumption as well. That's, I think, one of the next steps to get through, because no one has that in the country.
Marijuana bars, why not?
Yeah. I would much rather ask a girl out for a joint than a drink. Like, sounds way better.
Yeah. That's a great idea. And is that illegal because it's not something that's financially or morally viable? No, it's illegal because alcohol lobbies don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
Prison lobbies don't want it. They want people to be arrestable, and they want their products to be to have less competition. And when you get down to it, people's freedom, just to live their lives, should not be this impacted by these special interests who have so much of a thumb on the scale when it comes to legislation. It's something that really needs to be pushed back against.
Right. They're enforcing their own, like you said, special interest. It's not free market. It's not capitalism. So many people want to blame the problems in this country on capitalism, but this is so far from capitalism. This is nowhere near free market. This is not what any of us libertarians are talking about. Not even close.
If you want to switch gears a little bit, just kind of talking about misplaced blame on capitalism, healthcare is probably the biggest, I'd say, example of that happening that I've ever seen in terms of encountering people and things that they care about. When it comes to healthcare, people are like, capitalism doesn't work. We need to get one single payer. And it's like, whoa, time out. Healthcare is one of the most regulated and government-controlled industries in the entire country. Dating back to World War II, when wage ceilings were imposed and employers started circumventing that by offering, attached medical benefits as something that became a custom and a standard here. Without that blueprint, you have an entirely different timeline of, the way people can access insurance. It might be more like auto insurance, where if you lose your job, you don't suddenly lose the ability to drive. You still have your auto insurance, assuming you have, some savings piled up so that you can keep paying those premiums. But,
Right.
the point being is that's a super competitive market. They feature cost. You don't use your auto insurance when you go to get an oil change. You don't use it when you go to fill up gas. But when you look at the medical industry, you use your insurance for every single thing. If you're going in to get a routine checkup, boom, insurance. If you're going in I need 3 stitches, boom, insurance. And there's no pricing menus up front. Like doctors don't and healthcare providers don't compete on the basis of pricing. So cost just isn't a factor because everyone assumes, oh, insurance will get it. I know what my copay is, and it's the same pretty much anywhere I go. Mm-hmm. And you have this entirely separate, you have all this money being spent, and there's no market mechanisms working at all in the process. On top of that, when you look at, the employer provided insurance, these are largely plans that are selected by HR representatives. And not to knock them, but my career, I've got 13 years in supply chain, and one of the things that we do is we identify which suppliers are ideal to use based on track records, based on quality, based on price. And I would say in 99% of businesses and organizations, you don't have the supply chain people picking the healthcare plans. You've got someone in HR doing it, and they might have just really liked the lunch that was provided by the person who they check that box from every year during open enrollment, and that's as much thought as is given to it. So all of these things that, competition, price consciousness, things that affect markets and allow the free market to work and allow quality to go up and cost to go down, none of that exists in healthcare. I've seen projections that if we opened up things to be more like a free market, healthcare costs would be slashed down to a third of what they are right now. That is so significant. That can help so many people in this country. We really need to be talking about that kind of solution. And whenever someone says the free market doesn't work, because the government's controlling everything, that needs to be challenged every single time, because that's completely not true.
Right. And it's literally the biggest conversation pieces are the most controlled industries. Because you mentioned healthcare. I think a close number two is higher education. Some of the most controlled and regulated, and government's fingers in everything. And that's the other thing that everybody wants to get for free. And it's like, you wouldn't be begging for this if you didn't already put 17 layers of government on this to make it more expensive than any normal human could afford.
So there's this economic truism that anything the government subsidizes automatically becomes more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
If you want prices to go up, get the government to subsidize it. I saw a recent chart where it just showed a sampling of industries, and it was just a tale of two cities. You have things the government subsidizes and regulates, costs have drastically skyrocketed. Things that have free market competition, like consumer retail products or electronics or voluntary subscriptions like cell phones, that stuff is going so down, just compared to what all you were getting versus what innovation, price. It's all improving when it's free market competition, not government control and government subsidy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, somehow we have a computer that's half the size, can do 3 times as many things, and is still cheaper than it was in 1980.
Yeah.
And yet I paid almost 10 times as much for my college education as my parents did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And hey, I'm a millennial. I'm still paying off my student loans from grad school. So I'm right there with you. Like I'm not just divorced from this thing, looking at it like, oh, those students just need to pay their bills. I took on student loans too. I'm still paying them off, and I'm 37 years old.
Yeah, I think, people a lot of times just assume that if you're talking about this from this point of view that you didn't experience it or that you're not going through it. As libertarians, we get called like upper class a lot, or out of touch, because people assume that we don't have student loans or healthcare costs or all of these things that we're arguing against making free. But we live in the same system as everybody else. I'm broke, but we're just don't want the government to come in and ruin everything for the sake of me being able to eat a little bit better or get a cheaper education.
Yeah. And, going back to what I was talking about earlier with voting with your tax dollars, if those are issues you absolutely care about and you would rather not fund crazy other things like forever war, then, oh my gosh, do that. You should have the right to say, these are things I want the government to spend my, tax dollars on. And you're not going to be alone. And there are large groups of people with strong ideologies who agree with you. And you guys should be able to work together voluntarily and spend that money that you want to allocate it towards, instead of just being like, gosh, this system is the only way things can work. Therefore, if you're talking to a Democrat, they're like, government taxes are the only way to solve the student loan problems. Therefore, I want Donald Trump to be in control of a government that I have to pay money to. It's like, think about that. Your guy's not going to always be in control. So think about what it's going to be like when your guy's not in control, or gal in our circumstances, because again, we are promoting Dr. Joe Jorgensen for president.
For sure.
But if someone you don't like is in office, think about the amount of power you want them to have. And then, take a step back, take a look at the forest. Anyway, there's lots of little conversations you can get into like that.
Yeah, I think it's is it a Carlin quote that's the president should have such little power that it doesn't matter who it is?
I've heard that one before, but I don't know who it's attributed to.
I was having that problem. I'm in Michigan petitioning right now, and one of the petitions I'm carrying is to revoke the Emergency Powers of the Governor Act of 1945. So this petition is definitely very one-sided. It's coming from the Republicans, and it's specifically about the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdowns that she's doing. But on a grander scale, we're making sure that no governor can do the crazy stuff that's happening in Michigan right now, where they're just able to declare a state of emergency for an undisclosed amount of time and just act like a tyrant for it's been over 6 months now here in Michigan. So I'm trying to talk to these Democrats about what happens when you guys lose. Your last governor was a Republican. Your next governor is probably going to be a Republican. You're a purple state that flip-flops almost every time, like the country does. Like, you're not gonna you just watch your Democratic governor give the Republicans a blueprint on how to be a tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to take that playing card away from them before you hand over the reins.
But so there's a lot of short-sightedness in politics and a lot of short memories I've observed.
Oh yeah.
But on the topic of coronavirus, and that's something that's serious and that's impacting almost everyone in this country. And I'm of the stance where this is a serious virus. You should take it seriously. And also the government needs to learn what the hell private property is and what they can control and what they can't. The government shutting down private businesses is an absolute atrocity to the concept of private property rights. What the government should do, instead of politicizing whether or not the virus itself is a hoax and making half of the country immediately just reject it and not take it seriously and spread it casually, is provide education, provide resources. If you're going to spend money in the government, spend it on stuff like masks and vaccine development and stuff where if people want to use it, they can have it available and it is their choice to do so. If a business wants to run and operate despite the coronavirus existing, let them know what kind of guidelines are safe for people to do. Let them know and make those decisions for themselves. And if places are revealed to become hotspots where everyone's just getting sick and spreading it, then hold them financially liable for that so that they have a market-based incentive to not be irresponsible. That way, people can be free and conscientious without all of this defiant, like, hey, the government said it, so screw them, I'm going to do what I want. And this has been going on now for 6 months, 6.5 months. And we are still basically quarantined in many cases. I tried to plan an event out at an outdoor brewery in my district because we're doing some block walking this weekend. And I called them up and was like, hey, are you guys going to be, just open to, distribute from the windows so we can gather outside and be distant? And they're like, no, we're shut down still. I don't know if we're going to stay in business much longer. And that broke my heart. This is like, I'm trying to support a local business, and give a thank you to the volunteers who are showing up to do block walking with me by buying them some drinks. And man, it's just like, I did not expect them to have not even window service, because just the governor of Texas said, hey, if you're a brewery, you are not, you're not vital. So you can't be open.
Yeah, Texas has been doing some interesting stuff with this. I was supposed to be down there last month for Mobilize 2020, the conference for Young Americans for Liberty.
I was scheduled to speak at that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was so excited for that. And they told us what, a day and a half before it started?
Yeah.
That nope, not happening anymore.
Yeah.
We were
the local group was able to actually kind of do a smaller kind of backup version of it just for a day, kind of in the Woodlands area, which is it's a community just north of Houston. And I did get a chance to speak at that, and it was interesting that group. There were some kind of old guard who were just really dyed-in-the-wool social conservative Republicans, and then everyone basically who doesn't have more gray hair than not on their heads who was there was just like, yeah, libertarianism, you guys, yeah. So it was like, when I first sat in there and listened to some of the speakers, I was like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm in church being lectured right now on on all of these things. And it's nothing, not a knock against church, just like, that's not the kind of political speech I want to hear.
right.
And then as the end of the event kind of tapered off, it was much more liberty friendly. So that was a nice, I'd say a nice kind of microcosm for how this entire movement is looking.
Yeah, YAL is an interesting organization. It's definitely right-wing libertarian. Like, it's there are a lot of people who I would consider to be Republicans in the organization, but we're the big tent party. We're supposed to be welcoming to those people. If they call themselves a libertarian or call themselves liberty, that means that they're probably like on the path.
Yeah.
And telling them that they're not a real libertarian is not going to help them further down the path. It's going to turn them off and make them go back to being a Republican.
I think the biggest light bulb moment for people who are on that path is when they understand that it's not just don't tread on me, it's don't tread on anyone. And once you realize that it's not, fighting for your own rights is kind of something you're programmed to do because it's constantly like, how's the government hurting us? Like, what's going on here? But when you understand the government should not be harming anyone, the government should not be harming anyone's rights. And even if somebody wants to live a life that I don't agree with, as long as they're not hurting anyone, I should defend their right to do that. That, I think, is the biggest light bulb moment in terms of getting out of that, like, kind of dropping, I guess, maybe the conservative label and just embracing libertarian. I don't want to, speak, ill of anybody who has not made that realization yet, but it's once you get that, you start to see it's a lot more selfless when you start saying liberty for all instead of, my liberty.
Right. I like in New York, the LP on all of their stuff, it's all your freedoms all the time is like the tagline. And I love that. Because it really does, like you're saying, it's not about me, it's about the we, it's the collective freedom. BLM loves to say injustice, or what is it? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's completely accurate. If we let them control, if we let the government control, what some people are putting into our bodies because we don't like the idea of legalized heroin, that there's no difference between that and, I really don't like people associating like any big government with like Nazis or Russia, but it's a slippery slope that will always end up there. And I think the US is a pretty good example of that because we're pretty far down that slope already.
Yeah, and I honestly, whenever someone says a slippery slope argument, I immediately think, well, that's a fallacy. It doesn't necessarily mean it. But when the government's involved, it's 100% of the time true. Look at something like as innocuous sounding as the Patriot Act that was introduced almost 2 decades ago. They're like, hey, terrorists are bad. We need to stop terrorists. And right now, it's the spying that the NSA can do on people is used over 75% for drug enforcement. It's less than 1% used for terrorism. And a lot of that is just people who work there spying on people they know. And these cases keep popping up and popping up. And this is a complete violation of our rights. That's another really important distinction I like to make with the incumbent I'm running against, because he's fully on board with the ongoing NSA and spying and thinks that it's keeping America safe. And it's like, no, it's keeping America incarcerated. And that kind of stuff is unacceptable. Like we have a Fourth Amendment, against unreasonable search and seizure, and warrantless spying, it fits that bill completely. I don't understand how anyone who has taken an oath to uphold that can support such a thing.
Yeah, it's the Patriot Act is one of the worst things we've done as a government, I'd say. Probably since the end of slavery.
I don't know, caging children on the border is pretty bad too.
That's true.
That's something that, like, no matter what your views on what the process for legal immigration should be, if your politics make you say, yeah, it's great that those kids are behind bars, look in the mirror, like, just rediscover your humanity. We can talk about processes for naturalization all day long. We can talk about ways to make sure that there aren't people who are being basically abused on slave wages because since they have to live in the black market, you can pay them and treat them however you want. We can talk about that stuff. We can't talk about it being okay for children to be in cages.
Right. Yeah, that's just an unexcusable piece that I don't understand how both halves of the country were okay with that at one point in time, because everyone that knows their stuff, Obama built the cages and Trump filled them. It was a two-man job.
Whenever Trumpers, and sorry for calling him that, like to mention that Obama built the cages, it's like, yeah, so you're supporting an Obama policy. That that makes them stop at least for a second and get mad just because they heard, themselves being compared to Obama.
That's always great. Okay, so we've talked about what you believe and why you believe it. I want to talk about why you decided to jump into this race and run for Congress, because that's a big jump.
Well, initially I was looking. I wasn't going to be I wasn't going to be a candidate, and then I started looking at it, and I was like, you know what? I want there to be a face for libertarian candidates, so that people can say, okay, this is someone I can actually listen to. And there are a lot of really passionate people in the movement, and there are sometimes that passion manifests itself in a lack of, I'd say, outward self-awareness. And you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to throw anybody under the bus right now, but I don't want people to think of us as a joke party. I want people to understand that we're serious, that we're here to solve problems, and that they can trust us to actually reduce the amount of harm this government has over them. So when I was first looking at, maybe dipping my toe in the water, it was right around the time, I guess August of last year, that Crenshaw tweeted out his interest in red flag laws. And I was like, this is garbage. This is one of those guys that ran on like this, like, hey, liberty, I have a cool eye patch. And it's like, everyone's like, okay, liberty, that's fine. And then like, once he got in office, he just started immediately, falling in line with all of the authoritarian government control. And that was a bridge too far for me. So I started kind of looking at it. And when I was, I guess, around November, December last year, I noticed that no libertarians had signed up yet with the Secretary of State. So I was like, I guess it's going to be this one. One of our great candidate coordinators here in Texas, Ted Brown, and I had a conversation, and I just decided, okay, if nothing else, I'm going to give the voters a better choice. There will be at least one person on their ballot who doesn't support red flag laws. And at the time, there was a different Democratic frontrunner in the primary race, but she ended up dropping out whenever the current candidate got in or got the nod. So still the case. I'm the only candidate in this race who does not support red flag laws, and that singular focus was kind of the springboard. I've always been a really passionate activist and believer in the ideology that the government shouldn't harm people, and that society would be much better if it were based on voluntary interaction with others. And this is really I guess an extension of my belief in that, and me putting my money where my mouth is.
All right. I love that. I definitely agree that there have not been a whole lot of candidates in the Libertarian Party that look, sound, act as good as you do. You're a good face for the LP for sure. We've had some interesting ones in the past. But I'm curious, a lot of like the LP has this pretty big split between, the somewhat pro-government and then like the just complete anarchist. And so you're running for office to be part of that government. So I'm curious, how do you think that we as people or as a society could make a government that still functions in a similar way actually work for the people?
Well, I wouldn't want a government that functions in a similar way. Our government is broken. It is horrific and abusive, and it needs to change. Now, what the trick is helping people understand what that change looks like, and not something that they need to be worried about. What I would like to see is whenever the implementation of that vote with your tax dollars idea rolls out, you will start to very quickly see what the people actually prioritize. You won't have all of these bloated budgets for things that bureaucrats just think they need to keep spending money on because they don't want to, they don't want to lose budget for next year and have to, cut their own operational expenses. And you'll see like where the priorities of Americans lie. And once we kind of start shedding the excess, services and stuff that people don't want, people will realize that they really don't need the government for as much as they thought they did. And you can see, alternatives start to pop up. Like I like to use the example of the Postal Service. Like UPS and FedEx are much better delivering packages than the United States Postal Service because they have a competitive motive to do so. And when you have services that people demand and legitimately need that the government currently has a monopoly on, you can start to see that maybe this would be better if a provider that is more concerned about customer service and more concerned about prices and more concerned about, beating out the competition and earning your business can offer those same services, it makes more sense to transition to a more voluntary subscription model. And I don't want to get rid of the government for people who want it. I don't want to take that away from them. If you want to keep on being a like having a Costco membership, if you want to be a GovCo member and pay that membership fee every year and have access to those services, I think you totally should be. I just don't think you should be able to make other people pay for things that you want if they don't want them. So I really like to try to paint a vision of a way to adapt to a model where you are not being forced to fund things you oppose, and you can still get the services you want. And that's something that becomes an individual decision. And it could be something as simple as filling out a short form each time you're filing your taxes every year. And hey, we're going to adjust the budget this way a little bit, or I want a little bit less of this, or I like legal drugs. I don't want to fund the DEA. Just whatever it is. And you start to see the priorities emerge, and you start to realize that people like me running for office aren't quite as necessary. You don't need someone to represent you because the internet exists, and you can express what you want in real time at any time of the year. And I'd really like to just see a transition away from people telling you how to live your life so that you have more control over it. That doesn't mean I want lawlessness and chaos and violence. And at the heart of everything, our ideology is based on not initiating aggression against other people. And if you can respect other people enough, they should be able to respect you the same, so that you can live and coexist without getting into altercations. And when differences do arise, like they inevitably will, you can have a restitution model to solve those differences.
I like that a lot. I think I like the way that you answered it in the beginning of, you wouldn't want a government that works quite the way that that this one does. But I have one more question, and it's kind of a trick question. But if you could, as a congressman, if you could tell that a majority of your constituents disagreed with you on a vote, is there a situation that you can see yourself voting against your principles to vote with your constituency on something?
That's a really good question. And I actually have preemptively done that for one topic that we haven't touched on yet. And that is LGBT and racial equality. So a lot of times libertarians think that the government telling businesses that they need to, or that they can't tell, that they can discriminate, a lot of libertarians think that the government shouldn't be able to stop businesses from discriminating. And they have come out vocally against the Civil Rights Act and stuff like that. That's something my campaign will never be a part of. I understand that there's still a lot of bigotry and ugliness in this country, and that the idea of campaigning in a way that empowers that ugliness is just not something I support. So that's one of the areas where I'm actually a bad libertarian, because I've listened to people. And I think that I actually applaud the Supreme Court over the summer adopting my platform policy of including gender and sexual minorities as protected classes under the EEOC. So I think that shows that when it comes to an important issue that a lot of people really care about and would basically hurt people if it's opposed, I'm sorry, I'm going to go with the not hurting people versus the hardcore libertarian purism. So that was one area where initially it was like, well, I'm a libertarian and this is kind of something that, they don't want the government to do, but it's in place, it exists. And in the context of modern America, the thought of running on a campaign of dismantling something like that's just a loser. You're not going to win that because the people don't want it. So I'd say that, preemptively, yes, I've done that. That was something that was that actually distinguished me here locally. And during the primary season, I was endorsed by the only libertarian member endorsed by the Houston GLBT political caucus. I sat through an 11-hour nominating caucus session that they had, and I was the very last one on the list. And they said, "Yeah, we like what you're saying. We will endorse a libertarian." And they said, "We're a nonpartisan organization. Thank you for caring about what we care about, and putting yourself out there and standing up against people who think it's okay to be bigots."
That's awesome that you were able to get an endorsement for that. I think that's where we struggle as a party and as a movement a lot is, getting support from people outside of the movement. we love to throw fundraisers and things on Facebook and YouTube for a bunch of other libertarians to watch, but not a lot of going out there and finding the people that don't know what the word libertarian means, let alone are a member.
I would say a solid 40% of my donors are non-libertarians. I've been able to be really effective with, and this is not just Democrats or Republicans. It's kind of across the board, because this platform of freedom has so much to offer everyone. It's just a matter of helping them understand the benefits of it and helping them overcome the fears of not having it anymore.
I love that. That is a really encouraging statistic, that you're bringing in that many outsiders. I've worked on way too many LP campaigns that were, 100% funded by party members. There was, and the candidate wasn't even trying to change that. It was, oh, we need to call through the donor list again, instead of maybe we should go find other donors.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, I think this is probably a good place to wrap up. So if you would like to, give viewers where to follow you, where to find your policies, how to donate, how to get involved, go for it.
Thank you. First of all, my name is really hard to spell, so I'm going to emphasize it again. It's Scheirman, and you're going to need to know how to spell that for all of this stuff coming up. So my website is Scheirman for Congress. That's for spelled out FOR. There you'll find all of my issues. I have a merch store, a donation link, a volunteer link where you can sign up for that. You can see other interviews I've done. So that's ScheirmanForCongress.com. I'm really prominent on Facebook at facebook.com/Scheirman for Congress. I have a pretty active Twitter at Vote Scheirman. I'm on Instagram at Scheirman for, Instagram.com/Scheirman for Congress. And I did start a TikTok, but I don't know if that's for me. I might be too old of a millennial for that to really get off the ground. I do have a couple of cute videos of my dog on there, so that's about it.
I will have to go check that out. I have refused to download TikTok. I've looked at it a few times on my browser, but I absolutely refuse to download it or to make an account. I have fought with my girlfriend, my sister, multiple people on this. I refuse. But good on you for stepping out.
and if you are seeing this and you're local to Houston, I am doing block walking every single weekend leading up to the election. So please reach out or sign up on ScheirmanForCongress.com/volunteer. This is where the rubber hits the road. If we're going to actually grow out of our little niche, then we need to talk to people who aren't libertarians. So I really appreciate your help with that.
All right. Well, Elliott, thank you so much for coming on. I hope that this is the first of many conversations.
I appreciate it, David. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the like and subscribe buttons below. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fight for Liberty, and support the channel at patreon.com/fightforliberty. And as always, keep up the fight.